In this video we are going to discuss three very important things about how to play Chopin, the three most important pillars of his style in my opinion. So if you're gonna play any pieces by Frédéric Chopin, this video might be very helpful and hopefully very interesting to you. Today I will show you 4 pieces by Chopin, and this will be great for intermediate piano learners because 2 of these pieces are Nocturne and Valse in C# minor, and we'll have a quick look at 2 very advanced level pieces, Variations Opus 2, which is an absolutely beautiful, amazing, but rarely played and very tricky piece, and of course a very famous Grand Polonaise Brillante Opus 22. And I actually have produced comprehensive tutorials on these pieces and some of the other pieces as well. So if you're interested in having clear instructions how to deal with all the challenges present in these pieces, please follow the link in the description. And there is also a nice discount for these pieces, which will expire in a few days. Principle number 1, effortlessness. Frédéric Chopin wasn't a strong man. He was actually very ill and died early of tuberculosis. He has actually frequently complained about his 4th finger, that it is very weak. So that's why if you feel that your 4th finger is really weak, this might be a little comfort to you to know that Frédéric Chopin himself had the same problem. Although his playing was described as delightful, he wasn't able to produce a gigantic, brilliant sound, unlike Franz Liszt, for example. And when you have unlimited strength, you're likely to show off, but when you are weak, you will have to spend your energy wisely. And this might explain why Frédéric Chopin is considered to be one of the founders of an efficient piano playing approach. Chopin intuitively developed piano playing principles which are confirmed by modern research on piano playing efficiency. He was a true genius, and even his most challenging works are actually comfortable to play, as we say, pianistic. They feel very good under your hands, but of course only in case if you have a very good, efficient piano technique to begin with. It feels pretty good if you play it efficiently by using a variety of motions, for example, opening your elbows a little bit, relying on gravity and relaxing the fingers between each chord. And especially this passage, it's a very common thing for Frédéric Chopin because he has actually promoted such a way of piano playing where fingers 2 and 3 would serve you as anchors when you switch positions. That's why in this passage it's very comfortable to actually land on this finger if you use it as an anchor, supporting yourself properly at the bottom of the key. But for this, of course, you need to use a rotational motion in order to flip over the other relaxed fingers while hitting the thumb, and then support yourself properly at the bottom of the key when playing finger 2, which serves as an anchor. And the passage is written in such a way that this is the most intensive note melodically. This is a leading tone to C. That's why it's actually okay if you play it a little bit louder in order to support yourself. So it's very clever and very user-friendly. Or for example, this part. It's written in such a way that, of course, you need very dexterous fingers, but nevertheless, you can assist yourself using motions out and in. The most important thing you have to do here is to establish one leaning point per position where you would really engage with the bottom of the key. So one note from the group of 6 notes is my leaning point. Here, 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 here. So then it will feel more comfortable. And it's very interesting to observe how his understanding of piano playing physiology has evolved throughout his career, because in his early works, like for example in Variations Opus 2, there are of course also a lot of typical for Chopin spots, and we can already recognize his style a lot. But nevertheless, there are a lot of spots that feel so challenging, that are written in such a challenging way, they feel like torture sometimes. Like for example, this variation. It's very difficult. You don't want to know how many hours I have actually spent to be able to play it with a good accuracy rate. But even here, of course, you can find some efficient ways to work on these passages that help greatly. Like for example, in any kind of leaps, try to think about how exactly you move toward the distant note. So here, for example, you might want to try to push off from the chord and land on the upper note, like this. So it should feel like a little bit in circles. And of course, playing like this, you would first of all be better in relaxing the fingers while moving to the distant note. So you would better adjust to it, because your hands would be loose while moving around. And secondly, you can land on this distant note by having more skeletal resistance here in the knuckles. So you can get a very bright sound at no cost. Principle number 2, strength of spirit. Poland isn't a very big country, but it is a very proud nation. And people often think of Chopin music as of ear-pleasing, sentimental music, which completely overlooks a more fundamental aspect of it, an incredible strength of spirit, dignity, and pride. That's why Frédéric Chopin has composed so many mazurkas and polonaises, and this proud national Polish spirit influenced the rest of his heritage profoundly. That's why in one of his earliest works, Variations Opus 2, you already have a polonaise at the end of the piece. And this is despite the fact that those are actually variations on a Mozart's aria from Don Giovanni. So here, Polish spirit wins over Mozart's elegance in Chopin's opinion. And one of the most characteristic elements of this style are very strong, absolutely gorgeous, splendid dotted rhythms. So for example, even in this piece that starts rather gently. You have a lot of these dotted rhythms. That's why, for example, in such situations, that's a perfect occasion for a little bit of rubato and a little bit of air before them. Yep. So you don't really want to play them together, because if you just run through them, it sounds kind of all together like an yesterday's oatmeal, and it's not very tasty. And even in his nostalgic and lyrical compositions, like so you don't really want to rush through this pop, 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 pop. You want some space between them, and you want to articulate them, even though you play with the pedal. But with a gesture, you have to nevertheless play them somehow, live through them. Or for example, in this piece. It's so vulnerable, so intimate. You might think this is such a fragile, such a lonely and intimate piece. What kind of strength there might be, what kind of pride. And then here we go. Of course, this dance is a rather like a faded memory, but nevertheless, it's there. I have this mazurka right in the middle of one of the most intimate and fragile pieces ever written by Frédéric Chopin. The third principle, nobility. Once I was a judge on a piano competition in Paris, in France, and one participant destroyed her chances to succeed in this competition already from the very first note. So she just played the first note of Chopin's first ballade, and it was already clear that she's out. All the jury members unanimously voted against her. So what did she do so wrong, actually? She just started the piece in a very rude way. So she was kind of preparing to her performance, and jury members were preparing to listen to her, opening their notes, preparing their pencils, and everything was kind of quiet. And then suddenly, out of the blue, she was like, she was banging this piano like 10 times louder than I did now, because just I want to spare my piano and your ears. But that was absolutely disastrous. And one of the jury members, who was in his 80s, who was sitting next to me, he was so horrified and shocked that he started to grasp the air. So I was really worried that he's going to get a stroke. So in a nutshell, a forte in Chopin doesn't mean that it has to be very loud. We want to strive for a singing sound and noble, rounded sound quality. So even when we play very brilliant pieces with a lot of texture like this one, I want to get a rich, big sound, but nevertheless, I want to cushion with the whole arm when playing loud notes, and of course avoid this harsh, straightforward sound. For this, of course, you have to have a lot of strength at the fingertips, but nevertheless a lot of freedom in the rest of the arm. And of course, very often I rely on whipping motion that originate from the elbow. Being very close to the keys so I don't miss eventually. But nevertheless, when you use a whipping motion, which originates here, you can stay really close to the keys. You can start from the key basically, but you can play pretty loudly actually. The most important is just to listen to whether it sounds harsh to you or not, and nevertheless cushion with the wrist right after the head, like this. And of course, even in the very loud spots like this one, I nevertheless try to voice the chords and the octave. So for example, here I would follow the upper voice, for example, and hide the lower voice, or vice versa. And of course, I would try to play the right hand a little bit softer and lighter than the octaves in this spot, for example. So there are a lot of things we can do in order to reach a very powerful, mighty sound, but nevertheless not a straightforward one, especially in pieces where we start very tenderly. And then we have just a half of bar to reach forte. despite all this passion, despite all my urge to go all in and to convey this absolutely heartbreaking and desperate climax, we nevertheless have to avoid accents in passages like this. So it doesn't sound with impulses, but rather like a wave of emotion. And of course, we would have to nevertheless shape melodic embellishments like this. So we can't just play it vertically, we nevertheless have to play it beautifully and sing through it, because there are those leading tones which are nevertheless very expressive despite conforza. And of course in appassionato we nevertheless want to provide this length and the sensation of a wave rather than a series of impulses. So you can get away with a bombastic, bravura-like showing off sound in some of the Liszt's pieces or maybe in Alkan, but in Chopin it's often unforgivable, in my opinion, because true nobility, the way I understand it, implies superb control over aggression. And I know this will sound controversial, and feel free to disagree with me in comments. I always appreciate your feedback, but I have a suspicion that Chopin wouldn't be very happy to hear that his beautiful etudes, that are so beautifully and carefully crafted, are mostly turned into virtuoso pieces to compete who plays faster and louder. That's why even when I play something like Polonaise Opus 53, I do my best to avoid a direct, rough approach. And despite the fact that people kind of got used to this bombastic, strength-oriented approach so much that they kind of expect it, and they lack it in performances like mine sometimes, but in my opinion, it's simply wrong to play Chopin like this. Please write in comments whether you actually agree with me or not. I will be very happy to hear your thoughts and alternative opinions. And of course, if you are interested in the courses on these pieces or some other pieces, please follow the link in the description. Have fun playing piano and see you next time.